Hey, I wanted to share this tuning with you that I've been kind of playing around with for a while. It's B, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, B, and D sharp. Sometimes I tune it up a little higher, sometimes I tune it up a little lower. The intervals are what matter more than the actual notes themselves. The interval relationships that we have here are perfect fifth between the sixth and fifth string, a perfect fifth between the fifth and fourth string, a perfect fourth between the third and fourth string, a perfect fourth between the third and second string, and a major third between the second and first string. It'd be like a major add 2 chord, or add 9, however you want to call it. The way I conceptualize this tuning is like having a drop tune guitar minus the high string as your first 5 strings. So meaning you can play the first 5 strings like you would a regular drop tune guitar, with your 5th string kind of acting as like your 6th string would in that tuning. So you can, play all your like regular drop tuning stuff with your 5th string, like as acting as your 6th string. It functions like that. You can play all your regular like drop tuning kind of chords. All that stuff kind of works the same as it would there. You could still play all like your A string based scales and chords, but you would just be starting on your 4th string instead of your 5th string. Say like your major 7 chord shape, or your minor 7 chord shapes, or your major scale and your pentatonic scales. All that stuff is the same. It all transfers over, so it's not that huge of a jump as far as like with your lead playing and things like that, or like if you want to play chords on the higher strings. It's not that much different from what you might already know. The cool part about this tuning obviously comes from your 6th string, which is now a 5th below your 6th string. So like I said earlier, you have those 2 sets of 5ths. And with that, you can get some really interesting chord voicings with your bottom 3 strings. This isn't like a totally new concept. I think Jacob Collier uses like a similar kind of tuning on his 5 string, where there's like 3/5 at the bottom. And I think I probably got some of these concepts from like watching some of his videos or something like that. But also it's kind of similar to the tuning that Loathe uses, except they have a 4th on the bottom 2 strings instead of the 5th. But they still have like the drop tuning kind of thing on their 1st through 5th strings. The main thing about this tuning for me is the voicings you can get with your bottom 3 strings. So for example, you can do a minor chord like this, where you have your root, your 5th, and your minor 3rd. Using these kind of shapes for chugging in particular can sound very full and textured and more emotional versus like just a power chord, You don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the power chord. I still play plenty of those too in this tuning, but I feel like you can have a little bit more emotional context to your chords once you start adding some of these other notes in there. So like if you wanted to do a major chord on a high gain guitar in that kind of a lower tuning, you could do that, like say if you're in like B standard or something. It sounds something like this, which might work in some contexts. To my ears, it sounds a little bit crowded, versus if you take that same chord and you make it like a spread triad, where you put the 3rd on the top and then the 5th in the middle. I feel like it works a lot better with a lower tuning, and like when you have high gain. You still get that fullness of like a power chord, and that as your foundation, but then adding that 3rd on the top just gives you that extra amount of color. and context to the chord. I'm just going to go through a couple of different voicings that I've been using in this tuning for the low 3 strings, and maybe add some voicings where you incorporate some of the higher strings too towards the end. I'm going to first start with a major chord. Minor chord. sus2. Next, sus4. Your diminished. Augmented. Those are like just your root positions. Now, even more fun happens when you start incorporating some inversions into this. So let's start with putting the third in the bass and some of those different chords you get. So major chord with the third in the bass. And, you know, already sounding pretty heavy to me, even though it's a major chord. Because you have that minor 6 jump there. That minor 6 is just a heavy interval. And then just adding that top note there. Makes it even more just powerful sounding to my ears. And then make it minor, just lower that third down a step. sus2. And then if you want to do sus4, in this inversion, it just looks the same as a sus2. The diminished, we take the minor and lower the 5th. The augmented ends up being kind of the same shape as it was in root position. If we take the 5th and put that in the bass, major, minor, sus2, and sus4, which ends up looking like sus2 in second inversion. The diminished is going to look like this. One of my favorites. Again, the augmented is a symmetrical chord, so it just ends up looking the same as all the other augmented ones. So yeah, those are all like the main triad voicings and the main inversions of those that I would use on your low 3 strings in this tuning. I'm sure you can imagine the possibilities with chord progressions you can do with just that on these low 3 strings. And to take it one step further, you can also add in your higher strings. The first way I would do that is like maybe adding like in your 7ths with your 3rd string. So that's like a major 7 chord. That's a minor 7 chord. Your 2nd string could be good for adding like a 9th into your chord, or like doubling the octave, because it's the same as your B string. But like I like to use it for the 9th. For example, a minor 9 chord. Or a major 9 chord, which is a little bit of a stretch, but not that bad. Or if you drop the 7th out of that chord, nice 6/9 chord. You can make it that minor also. You know, just some really, really cool sounds. With the high string, I haven't been using that one as much. I know you can kind of add it as an extra 5th, like with this minor chord, or as a 4th. I find myself more likely to use that 1st string if I'm doing chords on the higher strings. So like, you know, chord shapes that you probably already know. You know, anything like that. Or like if I'm adding it to a power chord on the 5th string. doing shapes like that. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some uses for the high E string, or in this case, D sharp string. One other thing about this tuning, if you're having trouble learning the voicings and inversions with those lower three strings, all you have to do, if you already happen to know your triads for your standard tuned guitar, a lot of them are just like kind of inverted versions of those. So for example, we have our major chord here, standard major chord triad shape. If we just take it and flip it like this, it's the same thing. It's just like a mirror image of it, and now it's just like an inverted version of that same chord. So you can do that for all of your major triads. Like here, same chord. And that makes it really cool for your arpeggios too, because if you can do an arpeggio that has that starts off as a spread triad and then becomes more closed as you move up the triad. But anyway, that's my spiel on that tuning. And if you want to try this one out, please do. And if you come up with something cool, please tag me in it or send it to me. I'd love to hear what you come up with. And thank you for watching.